Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Good day, wherever you are in the world, morning, afternoon, or evening. But welcome to the Universal Theosophy Fall Lecture Series. We are, as you know, taking up the theme of human potential. And today, the particular sub-theme is creativity. And we have three speakers for you today. Three very creative people, I might add, to share with us their thoughts and ideas. We will have a question and answer period, or really more of a discussion period with whatever time is left over at the end of the three presentations. It's important that everybody stay muted during the presentation so as not to interfere in any way. And I know sometimes just by accident, we find that mute button turned on and then we can hear ambient sound. So let's, pay attention to that. This lecture series is sponsored by the Universal Theosophy website. And I wanted to say just a word about that. The Universal Theosophy website is really kind of a support website for any and all theosophical activities going on worldwide. We have all of the writings of HPV. We have all of the writings of Mr. Judge. We have writings from most and many of all the theosophical commentators, past and present. We have put an incredible amount of effort into trying to building up a library of resources that lodges from all over the world can use. Also, for people who are not near a lodge, when there isn't a Theosophical Society lodge or a Universal Theosophy lodge, the Universal Theosophy website offers a home for you to participate in activities. If you're in time zones other than that's helpful to you, we've been recording all of our study groups and sending out the recording to people who've signed up. I think I probably should show this on screen real quick. If you go to the Universal Theosophy website and you go to the community page and you go to classes, you can see all of the various classes that are running right now. Universal Theosophy has a particular connection with the ULT in Los Angeles. We partner together in putting together a whole bunch of their activities online, and you can find them here. And then on Thursdays, we have 4 different classes that happen once a month. We're taking up the Dhammapada on the first Thursday of the month. We have a theosophical theme. One of the central tenets of Theosophy this year, it's karma. We're studying the aphorisms on karma. The third Thursday of the month, we're doing Theosophy in cinema, where we're taking up a movie and discussing it, looking at it from a theosophical perspective. This past Thursday was Gandhi. We talked about the Gandhi movie. And then the fourth Thursday of the month, we have key concepts in the secret doctrine. So you're welcome to join in on any of these. There's a place to sign up here. And again, if you can't actually attend the meeting, you can get the recording of it. And then for the events like the ones today, those are posted on an events page. And as the lectures unfold, I will post them so that you can review them if you want to see them again or pass them on to a friend, or if you missed it altogether and want to watch it. And not only will we post the most current human potential lecture, but also there's a sign-up place for the next event that we're going to have in the fall, which is our International Great Teachers Day, which will take place on the 19th. And there's a place to sign up for that. And then links to all past lecture series you can find here as well. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to say to kind of lead into our first presenter. And I think at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Ava, and The floor is yours.
Let's see here. I'm just going to minimize this. So can everyone see my screen?
Looks good.
Okay. So I'm sure that every one of us have been wondering at some point what creativity really is. And I will ask each and every one of you to, through these 3 talks, focus on how you would define creativity. Now, if we want to find the source of creativity, we would have to start from the beginningless beginning. We have to start at the point where the universe is about to be emanated. And it says that it arises out of an impulse from absolute compassion, or Kamadeva. And as it is said here in Rig Veda, desire first arose in it, which was the primal germ of mind, and which sages, searching with their intellect, have discovered in their heart to be the bond which connects entity with non-entity. So it seems that creativity has to do with being able to bring forth that which is non-entity and making it into entity to create that bond. Let's see if I can get the next picture going. Here it comes. So this is a painting from one of the pioneers within abstract art, Hilma Klint, and also an ardent student of Theosophy and esoteric teachings. And she created a series of paintings that she called Paintings of the Temple. This is one of the altar pieces. And this is her way of describing how a universe comes into activity or manifestation. We have the dark black background, which symbolizes the ever unknowable. We have the golden solar disk, which symbolizes the oneness of everything. And from that oneness emerges the universal consciousness, which we all belong to. And then you see the 7 different rays of the Dhyani Buddhic creative forces springing out of this center. So the Dhyani Buddhic forces, or you could say what we call the Lord of Meditations, is what is the real essence of creativity. And these potentials is what every one of us have in our heart. So we could say that the ultimate seed of creativity is that Kamadevic impulse. It is that capacity, the potential to realize complete compassion in each one of us. And in the Buddhist tradition, it is beautifully expressed in the bodhicitta. And the bodhicitta is said that the mind that is aimed at awakening wisdom and compassion for the benefit of all sentient beings. So that is the very essence of our creativity. And we all have this as a seed within our own heart. However we choose to phrase it or whatever name we give it, this is the true creativity in each one of us. Now, in this painting of Hilma Klint, is an abstract version of the 2 swans, the swan in and out of time. And for Hilma Klint, she says that creativity starts with an abstraction that we're all too familiar with. When we study the secret doctrine or any other metaphysical idea, it starts with an abstraction. We scratch our head, we meditate upon it, we ponder upon it, and somehow, for each one of us, we have to find a way to make that abstraction into a form perceptible on this plane. So here we see the 2 swans in and out of time that now has become visible on this plane. So in that sense, you could say that creativity for us as students of Theosophy or esoteric teaching has to do with making the esoteric teaching not only understandable, but applicable. And in this, each one of us have our specific creative way of doing and sharing this. And in other words, we could say that we take high metaphysical ideas, we have to meditate upon them, but we also have to put them into practice, using them as a basis for true ethical living. I think that most of us would probably agree with Paracelsus when he says that everything is part of one universal creative effort. The macrocosm and man, the microcosm, are truly one. Therefore, it has been said that man is the perfect number, number 10, as the Roman numeral X here is showing the joining of spirit and matter. And we have the most sacred of symbols here, the tetractys, which has 10 dots in it. And we can view these 10 dots as the unlimited creative potentials in each one of us. Now, if we go to dictionary, an ordinary dictionary, we have different definitions of what creativity is. We say that it is the use of imagination or original ideas to create something. But it's also to be able to make connections between ideas, circumstances, and beings. And here in this definition, we have three very occult tenets. We have imagination, which we in Theosophy use a little bit different than we do in everyday life. Imagination is more the image-making power being used in a creative and conscious way. Whereas when we use the image-making power, we often do it in the direction of fantasy and a little bit, this and that. We have the original ideas, which ideally are the archetypal ideas. The way a universe unfolds is the same way that a human being unfolds in a spiritual process. And it's also the same way that an idea becomes a thought, which is then put into words and which is then put into action. And to be able to make connection is a crucial thing on a spiritual path. We know when we study theosophical literature that we are advised to really apply the law of correspondence as an analogy. That is to see that what happens in the greater universe is also happening on a smaller scale in my own daily life. And when we study in this way, we develop the power to see connections. We see connections between ideas. That is, we can see how the same archetypal ideas are showing themselves in the different traditions of wisdom, religious traditions, philosophical traditions. But it's also power that when we start to develop it, we start to see the connections in the circumstances in our own daily life. And we have a very dear student in our group, Inger, who expressed it beautifully. She said it's the capacity to see the small miracles of life. And we have all noticed it, those moments of synchronicity, where all of a sudden the connections become apparent to us. And as we train ourselves to see that and to perceive that in everyday life, we will also start to be more prone to see all the interconnectedness that actually are there behind the forms between all sentient beings. But certainly, we could say that there are different levels of creativity. And they seem somehow to be related to our different points of identification. And what is meant by that? Well, what do I identify with? Do I identify myself just with a personality? Or am I something more? Am I a spiritual being? Or is I a ray of the absolute universal consciousness? And we can see, depending on what level that we act from, we will use different aspects of the mind. And to extremely simplify things, hopefully, we can share three main points of identification, which then uses three different levels of the mind and therefore has access to three different levels of creativity. The most universal aspect of our mind is that which makes us feel to be I am. You could say it's the highest form of ahamkara or egoship. And this is, of course, the universal consciousness. We have it as an exemplification of the Jnani Buddhas, who with their very being unfold and uphold the whole universe. this universal consciousness diversifies itself into the different rays, which is each one of us, and which gives rise to the feeling of I am I. It has that sense of identity that is there from the beginning of life to the end of life, but also from life to life to life. The uninterrupted current that carries the consciousness from one life to the other. And in this type of, you could say, creativity or use of the mind, the creativity is used to create unity, to make things work according to universal principles. It is the capacity to see both the diversity and unity at once. And then we have the point of identification, which is the most familiar to us, where we feel that I am this and this person, I am the persona. And here the creativity can be at times quite muddled up. Very often it's directed by our senses. We smell a nice smell and then we immediately get an image of a cup of coffee or cinnamon bun or whatever it is. You see my weaknesses here. And so, you know, we form an image and it becomes the creativity to go and get this and that thing. Mind is more or less constituted of memories, characteristics, traits, skandhas from previous lives and this life. And it's a very type of conditioned mind. And in order to make the personal mind more, you could say, porous, so we can use the creative energies in a more spontaneous way, we have somehow to stop the modifications of the lower mind. And we can all see, you know, persons that come up with fantastic inventions, fantastic pieces of music or art, and they all describe it as moments of inspiration from something higher, something deeper inside themselves. And one of my pages the other day gave, I thought, a good definition of what personal creativity is. She said it is the capacity to be able to perceive opportunities where other people see problems. And I thought, what a beautiful way of approaching karma, the law of action and reaction, to instead of saying, you know, like, oh, here something is punishing or here is a reward, to just see it as opportunities. And you know that the first step in occultism is a perfect reliance on the law of karma. So if we could just meet every circumstances, every challenge in our life by just that what we need and want for our, you know, for our development, then we would find that the creativity of the more individual aspect will start to flow, will feel more spontaneous, will become more humoristic. Life becomes a little bit more of a play, not so stagnant as it can become otherwise in the personal consciousnness. So if we then take a look at the lower mind, we all know that it's called the monkey mind for a reason. You know, it jumps from one branch, the past, to another branch, the future. It jumps from pleasure to pain, from likes to dislike, from fears to hope. And in all sense, you could say that it's very sense-based. It's, you know, it takes us in one direction and then another direction. So we use the mind and we use the creative capacity in the lower mind as well. Sorry, okay. But we have to be able to see that in order to use the lower mind in a good way, because the moment we step on the spiritual path, we make sure that all our effort will intensify the power of our mind. So like it is said in the voice of the silence, we have to be aware of the dangers of the lower idis or the creative forces. And there is a danger of misusing those creative forces. And we may think often about this in connection with astral phenomena, clairvoyant, and so forth. But we tend to forget that one of our students here, Frederick, pointed out some time ago that the lower creative powers is also what we call fake news. The way we manipulate whole societies into beliefs of something that is totally fake. And, you know, to be perfectly honest, if we point the fingers towards ourselves, we can probably see that we all fall prey to that. Just let's think if someone has offended us and we want to tell that, what has happened to dear friend. Don't we all have a tendency to spice it up a little bit, to gain a little bit more of empathy in the whole thing? Or maybe if we have something that we really want, our personality really want, and if we are good with words, we're probably good in trying to convey that and to get our own way, so to speak. So true creativity has to do with an education of the mind through the guidance of the heart. And true creativity in that sense is to transform passion into compassion. It is to liberate the mind from the dominance of the senses. Of course, we should use the senses, but not being dominated by them. So we come to the point, what is the creative mind? Well, the creative mind is a mind that has a balance between flexibility and stability. A mind that only has stability tends to become rigid, and the rigidity starts to crystallize into dogmatism, into fanaticism. And we can all see what a political and religious fanaticism does to the world. Now, if the mind is only flexible, it will be a little bit wishy-washy. It will be here, and then we'll stay for a moment there, and then we'll, go somewhere else. So it becomes a mind that is not so reliable. So the balance between flexibility and stability is important. The flexibility to be open to take in other views than our own, to take in new ideas, to see new perspective, and the stability to be able to maintain one's motive of the Kamadevic impulse through all these differentiations. So in order to make our mind more creative, we have to be able to maintain our motive. We have to be able to use our image-making power consciously, and we have to set the spiritual will into action when it has become freed of the personal desires. And for this, we have to turn towards the higher cities, the true creative forces, the Dhyanibuddhic forces, the paramitas, as described in The Voice of the Silence in the third fragment. And the moment we start to try and approach those spiritual forces, we start to step onto the path. And in order to be able to stay in this state of consciousness, which we call the path, we need 7 golden keys to unlock the portals of true creativity. The first golden key is what sets the motive. It's crucial. Any composer who wants to compose a piece of music needs to strike a keynote, just like Helena Blavatsky struck a keynote for the whole esoteric teaching to unfold for our benefit. So the first is that Kamadevic impulse of charity and love immortal. And of course, we know that each of these paramitas have at least 7 different levels. So what we perceive as charity and love in the beginning may not be the same as we continue on the path, which is the process. The second paramita is harmony in thought, word, and act. And here we have the image-making power. We have to be able to dress up an idea in an image. That is the thought. We have to be able to maintain the thought. We have to be able to express it in words, and we have to act it out as an act. So when a person has an harmony in thought, word, and act, there is no more room for karmic action in that sense. And we have inspirational persons throughout history. We have Mahatma Gandhi, like was mentioned before. We have Mother Teresa. We have Nelson Mandela. We have the present Dalai Lama. The reason that what they say has such an impact is because they have this harmony in thought, word, and act that we have to strive for. Shanti is the third key, and it's patience. And patience isn't just about wanting to have things done quickly. Patience is foremost of all to be able to have stability of the mind. It has to be a certain point of one-pointedness that stops the mind from all these different modifications. And this, you could say, is the preparation for the next golden key, which is vairagya, equanimity in discernment, the discernment capacity to discern what is real and what is false. We sometimes call it the higher indifference, but it is that, you could say, key that helps us to transcend dislikes and likes. And of course, it's called the higher type of indifference, not because we should be cold and indifferent, of course, but because we shouldn't attach ourselves. We shouldn't be bound up by all what the senses creates. It's an interesting golden key, because vairagya is just in the middle. It's the tipping point, the balancing point. And if we see here, we can see that dana, shila, shanti, the first three paramitas, are kind of a preparation. When we come to vairagya, to transcend the polarity, this is where the personal consciousness starts to merge into the individual consciousness. And when virya, the next paramita, when the senses are in check, when we have liberated the lower consciousness from all its desires, then the spiritual will be free from those personal desires. And here is where the true creativity starts, to become co-operators and co-creators in nature. And if we are able to maintain that, like spiritual beings are being able to maintain it consciously, we get glimpses of it. Because this leads to that one-pointedness, that when we live our life, we are perfectly present in everything we do. We do things with awareness. It is like we are in, you could say, in a continuous state of meditation. And for those beings that have the capacity to realize that, then it flowers up in prajna, the wisdom of compassion. Here you have the whole circle come round from that original Kamadevic impulse that starts us off on the path and then merges us in as enlightened beings in the wisdom of compassion with a realized bodhisattvahood. So to conclude this talk, I would just like to end with this slide and with a quote from Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, which I think is the ultimate divine creativity, when he says, I established this entire universe with a single portion of myself and yet remain separate. And this is exactly what we have to do. We have this impulse within our own heart. And we, each one of us, each in our own creative way, have to establish our own universe. And still we have to have one part that remains separate, the witness position. And you know how it says in the Bible that in order to be able to enter the kingdom of heaven, we have to re-become to that childlike state again. And if you look at the very small child, and you see before their mind becomes too conditioned by previous skandhas, when they are still curious and fresh, they try and they try and they try because they want to explore. And that is the way that we also need to be in order to explore our true creativity. Thank you.
Eva, thank you so much. So lovely. I'm sharing your screen, and Joe, you can take over the screen, and we'll now hear from Joe Miller.
Okay, I'm unmuting, and let me see. I need to get my camera on. Okay, let me stop that. Okay, there we go. Hello. I
Do you
feel
want to
like
share, Joe? Did you want to share?
I'm going to share my screen. Yeah,
in a minute.
I
Okay,
feel like
good.
I want to soak in Eva's wisdom, though. That was so beautiful and such a garland threaded through the teachings, and it was very creative. It was about creativity, and it was beautifully creative. So I'm the middle speaker. So now if you need to make breakfast or you didn't make your bed or whatever, this is the time to do it so that you can be ready for AMS when it comes on. So just know that. Okay. All right, here. Okay. There we go. That's working, Jerry? Yeah? Okay. And it's
10-4.
Okay, good. Is my bar interrupting the right-hand end of the screen? Or do you just see the PowerPoint?
You're doing perfectly. It's fine.
Okay, okay. Okay. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Let me see, I thought I would just begin with a keynote here. This is from essayist and novelist Pico Iyer, which it's so simple, but I just love it. In everything sparkles the shimmer of living creation, and never the coarse finality of the created. A very intuitive perception. I wanted to start with a linguistic observation, which I kind of found sort of interesting. If you want to hunt around 19th century theosophical literature, you won't really find references to creativity. In fact, in all kinds of printed literature in English, you don't really find it. And this is a Google, I'm going to try to, sorry, I'm trying to hide it. I have a little, there we go. Well, okay, whatever. In this, the Ngram, if you're familiar with it, from Google Books, it catalogs the uses of words or phrases. And the word creativity was very flat in English. It was very flat up through 1940. And since then, it's increased 65-fold in its usage and its appearances year by year, which is kind of interesting, a 6,500% increase. Does this increased label of creativity necessarily make us more creative? Is it sort of like God saying, let there be light, and the more he repeats light, the light gets brighter and brighter? Do we become more creative simply by reprinting the word over and over? Do we regard this appearance of the word creativity as indicative of innovation? Or is it only parroting? Might it be actually creativity's opposite? Could there be some sort of spiritual vacuum where we are settling for a semblance and repeating that semblance? Were the English-speaking people before 1940 a distinctively uncreative lot? I mean, the poor things, they didn't have iPhones or Teslas, right? If we're not truly more creative, what explains this increased frequency? Is it self-flattery? Maybe it's democratic leveling, the watering down of the potency of a magical concept. Is it a symptom of a narcissistic culture? It's kind of interesting that at the same time, not to belabor this, at the same time, the word obligation has been, since 1940, has fallen to 50% in its printed usages. And I suppose if we follow the trend, at some point the two will cross. We'll be far more interested, at least in talking about creativity, than we will be in talking about obligation. It's interesting that the word invention has declined also, but the word innovation has increased. The word genius has fallen way down, 8-fold since 1800. And perhaps that's due to a materialistic aversion to the belief in tutelary spirits and angels. Apple, however, has instituted the Genius Bar. which is a live in-person interface between the consumer who needs help and the Apple technician. But which of the two is the genius, Apple has never made known to us. Maybe genius arises from an interface between the two of them. Okay, I'm not going to bore you anymore with linguistic observations, but I thought that was kind of worth mentioning. So let's do what we're told to do as students and go from above below. As Eva gave that wonderful keynote from the Vedic, beginning of creation, that desire first arose in it, and what that desire is ultimately, it's irreducible. It can't be finally analyzed. It's so constitutive to reality. And in the same way, in the Bhagavad Gita, we have in chapter 9 the beautiful statement by Krishna, who is speaking as the Logos, of course. Understand that all things are in me, even as the mighty air which passes everywhere is in space. O son of Kunti, at the end of a kalpa, all things return to my nature. And then again, at the beginning of another kalpa, I cause them to evolve again. By reason of my supervision, nature produceth the animate and inanimate universe. It is through this cause, O son of Kunti, that the universe revolveth. And as we know in Theosophical metaphysics, we're taught to think about the absolute reality as, unthinkable, as having no attributes, but as being the basis or the ground for everything that comes after it. And that ground is unaffected. That ground is inexhaustible. We can only make a placeholder for it in our thinking, since it remains unthinkable and unspeakable. And therefore, it's H.P. Blavatsky calls it be-ness, just the very capacity for being, be-ness, rather than any sort of being. But any true thinking that we have has to approach it by leaving that placehold for it. And then from that is this word, this logos, and this creative word, which is still very abstract, is binary, and even there it represents an interface between Prakriti and Purusha, between spirit and matter. And it's through the interaction of spirit and matter, which is mirrored in what we call the male and female, that we get all the world of forms arising. And all creativity, from the most abstract to the most immediate and personal, at some level, if we were intuitive, could be seen as this interaction between Purusha and Prakriti. And so, one of the first tenets is that there is no creation ex nihilo. There's no creativity out of nothing. Like so many other things, we judge from the outside based on surfaces and appearances. If it suddenly appears to the senses, we imagine that it just came into existence. But the wise have always told us that the region of the senses is only a world of shadows and effects. If we would unmoor our imagination from this tyranny of the senses and make it more metaphysically correct, we have to begin to leave space for the unmanifest. And this is a quote from the same essay from Pico Iyer, which creativity is endless flux, the imposition of the ever-changing upon the changeless, the grafting of movement upon the silent stillness. So that's a way of talking about that Purusha and Prakriti. And we're told the spirit is symbolized by motion, by ceaseless motion. And as Eva pointed out, creativity resides in that balance between flexibility and stability. So I like to take inspiration on this from that mystic work dictated by the adept to Mabel Collins, called Through the Gates of Gold. And there we read, the words to create are often understood by the ordinary mind to convey the idea of something coming out of nothing. This is clearly not the meaning. We're mentally obliged to provide our creator with chaos from which to produce the worlds. More practically, from the same work, the great initial difficulty is that of fastening the interest on that which is unseen. If you talk to an inventor, you will find that far ahead of what he now is doing, he can always perceive some other thing which is to be done that he cannot express in words, because as yet he has not drawn it into our present world of objects. So one of the first lessons we learn from this is we have to, creativity has something to do with perceiving the nothingness as something, perceiving the unknown, perceiving the unmanifest, turning one's attention towards the future or towards the inward, rather than being captured backwards by the image of the past. Oops, I'm sorry. Can I go back? I can't go back. Can I go back? Oh yeah, I can. Okay. Can you all see the comic? I'm caught. My screen is being blocked slightly by the Zoom, and I just want to make sure that it's not being blocked for you.
It's coming through loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay. So, wish I knew how to get rid of this. If I click, oh, there we go. Okay. Yes. So, nothing needs to make sense in the positive way. Also, from Through the Gates of Gold, we're given the image of seeds as another way of thinking about this. In proportion to the greatness of a poet, he lives in the consciousness with which the ordinary man does not even believe can exist. The consciousness which dwells in the greater universe, which breathes in the vaster air, which beholds a wider earth and sky, and snatches seeds from plants of giant growth. So there's this notion too that in creativity, the creative person has been seeded by those who have gone before. And those seeds have grown. And of course, the more perceptive we are, the more we are capable of germinating seeds from plants of giant growth. Not merely from pop culture, but from the great classics, of spiritual literature. So we have to be aware of what kind of soil we are. And of course, the plants of giant growth that Through the Gates of Gold is referring to is these great evolved beings, the Mahatmas, who were told are guiding and protecting and guarding humanity. This whole notion of that creativity is what we want to say, oh, well, isn't creativity originality? I mean, isn't the person, someone who's creative, they're just making their own thing. We don't want to imagine that they're part of a tradition or, of course, this is kind of juvenile, and it's sort of our, the false sense of autonomy that is really a signature of the separate self, of the separate personality. In Theosophical teaching, we're told that the human mind, the self-conscious mind, has been in fact seeded ontologically by great beings through what has been called the lighting up of manas, that natural process, which is mirrored in the reproduction that we have at our level in the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. But that natural process whereby these evolved beings, called in India the Agnishvata Pitris, the solar fathers, the fire fathers, that in the natural course, it is through their gift, through their ignition, and the word Agni and ignition are actually etymologically connected, that made human consciousness possible, and is mirrored in the Greek myth of Prometheus, of course, who brought fire to human beings. Let's look at a simple quotation by Maria Popova. Somebody of you may know Maria Popova. She is very creative. She's dedicated herself to kind of being a humanist, scientist, writer. She's a reader, first of all. She takes from many different sources. Fortunately, she finds the support to do what she does. And she has a marvelous website called The Marginalia, and you can always go in there and get lost anywhere, where she has references to great writers and thinkers, and many cross-references to other articles. All the articles are interlinked, and you can never go on the same journey when you go into her website. You don't need any preparation. It's great, but she has a lot to say on creativity, and a lot of pulling together other voices on creativity. And simply, she said, is the birthing of something meaningful that hadn't existed before. So it's not merely novelty, but it's something meaningful. The 18th century French theosophist Saint-Martin sort of sets a keynote for what I want to talk about next. A man is the sole being in the natural order who is not compelled to pursue the same road invariably. Creativity implies inward liberty. Of course, it requires much more than that, but minimally, it means there's some kind of non-determination inside the human being. A creative being is not held hostage to past conditioning. The human mind is not held hostage by animal instincts. Creativity is productive and brings forth something new, not something merely repeated. Now, of course, here you have human beings who seem to be following the same road invariably. I'm going to take a little trip here now into a few thinkers and philosophies that illuminate something about human freedom and human liberty. When we talk about human liberty, we're talking about freedom from past conditioning, freedom from being enslaved by the senses or by the personal self. In the moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant, we seem to have strong parallels to what theosophists distinguish as psychic versus noetic mental action. Human freedom reveals itself, for Kant, human freedom reveals itself not so much by artistic creativity, but by moral action itself. The human mind involved with the body naturally inclines towards the senses and passions. The mind passively acquiesces with what is acting upon it from without. And Kant called this the phenomenal man, the man that shows, the man on the outside. Like other great minds of his era, the 18th century, he was greatly influenced by the Newtonian view of the universe as a deterministic mechanism. And so the passive mind, the mind enslaved by inclinations, was not quite a person, but more acting like a thing. It was a gear in the machine. However, there also exists a noumenal plane for the human mind. It is on this plane that the mind has access to a universal identity, to universal ideas, where that mind can discern the moral law. And it is from this aspect of mind that moral action then takes place. The will within us can either be passively determined by inclination or actively through what he called reverence for the moral law. Simply put, the observed fact of resistance to natural inclination was for Kant the signature of the noumenal mind. If you saw someone or if you observed yourself resisting inclination for moral purposes, you could see that you were a person, you were more than an object. Something within was acting creatively. You weren't simply being pushed from the outside. So his evidence for freedom was negative. And we might also point out for Immanuel Kant, the dignity of human freedom means we can't simply be freed from one law, the law of our animal nature, in order to be subservient to another law, the law of our moral nature. That would still be a form of enslavement. So for Kant, he said that our moral nature was legislated by rational nature itself, the rational nature within each one of us. So in a sense, the rational nature within me is giving myself the moral law. It's determining this moral law. This moral law isn't handed down to me by God or by the Torah or by the laws of Manu or something like that. My dignity requires, and my true notion of liberty requires that this law has to come from myself. So even though my personal self looks at it and is humbled before it as if it was, I show reverence towards it, it is in a sense self-legislated. And this reminds us also of in this way of the European existentialists, typified by Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued that freedom was constitutive of human nature itself. For the existentialists, he says, there is no definite human nature. We are all naked. Each of us looks down from a dizzying abyss of responsibility and potentiality. And Sartre gave a very special meaning to the word transcendence. He wrote in his essay, Existentialism as Humanism, man is all the time outside of himself. It is in projecting and losing himself beyond himself that he makes man to exist. And on the other hand, it is by pursuing transcendent aims that he himself is able to exist. Since man is thus self-surpassing and can grasp objects only in relation to his self-surpassing, I got behind in my slides. This is Kant breaking the slides. Here's the existentialists. Man is himself the heart and center of his transcendence. And Sartre said, this is humanism because we remind man that there is no legislator but himself, that he himself, thus abandoned, must decide for himself. Of course, as Theosophists, we might bristle at this notion that man is abandoned. I mean, after all, isn't there karma? Isn't there a great chain of being? Isn't this the language of separation itself? But of course, we have to remember the existentialists were phenomenologists. They were exploring the human experience, the lived experience of personal life. They were not advocating any kind of objective metaphysics. And of course, for our personal egotism, illusion though it does often feel abandoned. Metaphysics wasn't their job, and the duty of another philosopher is full of danger. However, if your belief admits a cosmic law, Sartre would say you still have the liberty of giving that idea reality and weight in your own practice. You're responsible for your use of that concept and its transformative effect or lack thereof. So, so anyway, I wanted to bring this up because the existentialists are pulling a thread that has gone through human history, and we might find this thread also, this sense of the burdensomeness of freedom. It's also articulated in one of Plato's dialogues, in the Protagoras, where Socrates tells the myth of Prometheus and Epimetheus. And of course, in the ancient world, there were many tellings of the creation story. Prometheus, whose name means forward-looking, was a Titan, which is something slightly below the gods, or a kind of a demigod. Epimetheus was his brother, and his name means to look behind. And In the creation myth that is told in the Protagoras, which is really a way to talk about the burden of freedom for human beings. This is why Socrates is implementing it. But it comes time in this world for the creation of all the creatures and all the plants and all the humans. And Epimetheus comes to his brother Prometheus and says, look, you always get to do, you're the forward-looking one, you always get to do these great creative tasks. Can't I be given a chance this time? Can I please have my turn? And Prometheus relents. And so Epimetheus begins to give to all the creatures all the characteristics that they need for an even balance of nature, an even balance of all these different characteristics. So it's said to some he gives wings to fly, and to others he gives feet to run fast, and some he gives claws to catch prey, and others he gives fangs, and some he covers in hair, and others he gives feathers, and on and on. These different characteristics are given out. But then comes the need to create man. And when Epimetheus reaches in his bag for other traits, he discovers he has nothing left. And so man is born naked, completely vulnerable, without any kinds of traits or characteristics. And this, of course, means that Prometheus has to get into action. Prometheus has to become the savior of mankind. And so that's where he secures fire. He has to steal fire from the gods, and he gives it to mankind, and he instructs mankind in all the arts and sciences, so that in the absence of all these natural protections that animals have, mankind won't perish because of its vulnerability. And we have Prometheus. And of course, this myth has something to tell us, because we often behave Epimethean. We're often looking backwards, and this is not the way of creativity at all. It's interesting that the human mind seems to be situated, as Mr. Judge said somewhere, between the two great infinities of past and future. And yet, the part of the prejudice of the senses is that we only see the past through the senses. We only see the accumulation of the past as it is encrusted in the present surfaces of things. So in a real sense, in a Socratic sense, like in the allegory of the cave, we have to somehow turn around and stop walking backwards. We have to begin to face what it means to face the future, which is really to face what is internal to us, not like a corridor that we're going down, but something that is unfolding from within us, because it's only in that indeterminate potential, as Eva was pointing out, that we would find the secrets of creativity. Now, all of this brings us to Pico della Mirandola, who, unlike the existentialists, freedom is not the source of nausea, and nor is it a kind of privation, as we find in Plato's telling of the myth. Pico della Mirandola turns the whole thing around, arguing that the indetermination within human nature, that capacity for freedom, is a signature of divinity itself. Absence of definition is in fact the fullness of potentiality. And so we have a different definition for human nakedness. It's not a burden. And I bet you never thought you'd see this picture in connection with the Italian Renaissance, but there you go. Pico's great statement near the beginning of the oration on the dignity of man, he reimagines the narrative in Genesis, and he says, God took man as a creature of indeterminate nature, and assigning him a place in the middle of the world, addressed him thus: neither a fixed abode nor a form that is thine alone, nor any function peculiar to thyself have we given thee, Adam, to the end that according to thy longing and according to thy judgment, thou mayest have and possess what abode, what form, what functions thou thyself shalt desire. The nature of all other beings is limited and constrained within the bounds of laws prescribed by us. That is the laws of instinct. Thou, constrained by no limits, in accordance with thine own free will, in whose hand we have placed thee, shalt ordain for thyself the limits of thy nature. So for Pico della Mirandola, as we find in even amongst the Elizabethan thinkers, humankind is in this middle state. Alexander Pope said, know then thyself, determine God, not to scan God. The proper study of mankind is man, who's placed in a middle state between the celestial beings and the animal worlds. And for Pico della Mirandola and the great humanism that he launched, this was an enviable state because even the celestial beings were determined. In his essay, he goes on and says, on man, when he came into life, the Father conferred the seeds of all and the germs of every way of life. Now, whatever seeds each man cultivates, those will grow into maturity and bear their own fruit in him. These seeds, says Pico, may be vegetative, in which case a man becomes like a plant. They may be sensitive, which leads to brutishness. They may be rational, and then the man becomes a heavenly being. Or they may be intellectual, what we might call Buddhic, and he will become an angel and a son of God. But there's something even beyond the seeds, says Pico, just as there is something beyond discursive thought and rational thinking of the philosopher. There is the contemplative man, who is happy in the lot of no created being. He withdraws into the center of his own unity, his spirit, made one with God, in the solitary darkness of God, who is set above all things and surpasses them all. So with that in mind, I'd just like to say a few words about, even though I don't like the phrase, the creative process. And I wonder if we could start, first of all, by mentioning, there are a lot of books about the secrets of creativity. But really, would it be creativity if it could be told by a neuroscientist, or if it could be defined by technique? The poet said, a wonder shown is wonderful no more, and being flies forever from its own self-scrutinies. On the other hand, isn't it true that we do know something about the creative process? There are ways in which we can stimulate and loosen up our own creative flow. Let me propose a few claims. Maybe they're surprising claims, and we can, and I hope that my relative truths will be countered in our discussion. First of all, there are four of these. The act of creation, the first is the act of creation is not the aim of creativity. The second is imitation is not death. The third is originality has nothing to do with novelty. And the fourth is true inspiration blurs one's sense of agency. So let me start with the first one, and I'll go through these quickly. First of all, if we take a cue from Pico della Mirandola, this notion of retiring into the darkness of divinity, even if we don't mean by that contemplation in the exalted sense, which he describes, we can apply the idea analogously. In fact, it is articulated again and again by writers of substance, like Rainer Maria Rilke, Oliver Sacks, and Rachel Carson. The act of creation is preceded by a long process of incubation. That incubation must be loved and immersed in totally, and for its own sake. For all intents and purposes, the eventual aim of creation must be lost sight of. One of the best statements of this principle was articulated by H.P. Blavatsky, an aphorism, a well-known aphorism from her birthday book. And she wrote, "You cannot build a temple of truth by hammering dead stones. Its foundations must precipitate themselves like crystals from the solution of life." So that the temple of truth is not the focus. The solution of life is the present focus. That solution is made from the solvent of self. And you can think of the dissolution of any and every self-identifying attachment, which occurs through a quest of active questioning and vigorous self-challenge. Going back for a moment to the teaching of the adept, which we find in Light on the Path and Through the Gates of Gold, we're instructed in both those works that growth in the higher life is a well-rounded endeavor. It cannot be pushed willfully from one angle or another, or deformity will result, just as deformity would result in the growth of a body that was pushed in one direction. We are to take inspiration from the great trees who fill out roots and branches and girth for centuries. As for this solution of life, this creative incubation, Maria Popova, writing on Oliver Sacks, speaks of that it can be experienced as a buzzing, blooming chaos in the mind, this creative pre-work. Contrary to the archetypal myth of the lone genius, struck with a sudden eureka moment, Maria writes, this chaos doesn't occur in a vacuum. Rather, it coalesces from a particulate cloud of influences and inspirations, without which creativity, that is the birthing of something meaningful that hasn't existed before, cannot come about. And Oliver Sacks himself writes, creativity involves not only years of conscious preparation and training, but unconscious preparation as well. This incubation period is essential to allow the subconscious assimilation and incorporation of one's influences and sources, to reorganize and synthesize them into something of one's own. He makes a distinction between the mere retaining and appropriating of these influences and the more mature assimilating and incorporating them into one's own depths, where they become spontaneous and unconscious. Rachel Carson speaks about a turning point in the process of incubation, where suddenly the work of art, in her case as a writer, becomes self-luminous, takes on a life of its own. She writes, the writer's initial task is to come to know the subject intimately, to understand its every aspect, to let it fill his mind. Then, at some turning point, the subject takes command, and the true act of creation begins. The discipline of the writer is to learn to be still and listen to what his subject has to tell him. The second point is imitation is not death. Of course, we all hear imitation is death, right? It is impossible to really become a master of any art if we don't at first admire and enter into the artistry of others, of masters of that art, to really assimilate it. Wynton Marsalis, the great trumpeter and jazz historian and director of jazz at Lincoln Center in New York City, he speaks about educating the young people in jazz, and there are many young musicians who, when they find out that jazz means you can play whatever you want, they're all for that. They want to leap into some kind of freedom without having done the work, without having assimilated the tradition, and without having training. And he quickly points out this is not possible. The far shore of liberty you have to pass through the deep river of discipline to get there. And of course, in jazz music, that means you have to study and imitate many of the masters, and you have to learn your pentatonic scales, and you have to study jazz riffs that others have done and learn them in all 12 keys, and acquire a body of reflexes that takes years and years and years to do before you have a vocabulary in place by which you could then speak what the moment requires. So only then does liberty happen, but liberty requires this imitation. And again, Oliver Sacks writes, if imitation plays a central role in the performing arts, Where incessant practice, repetition, and rehearsal are essential, it is equally important in painting or composing or writing. All young artists seek models in their apprentice years. The third point I wanted to bring up is that originality is not novelty. Eva talked a little bit about originality, and we should think about the etymology of the word, that it has to do with origin. We who typically read things from the outside speak about when something novel appears, something in pop culture or whatever that nobody has done before in the formal sense. We'll say, oh, well, how original, whether it has meaning or not, and whether that meaning is crass or whether it is noble. We don't seem to make a distinction. But originality, as the word implies, requires retreating in consciousness back to the origin. It means coming from that origin. And as Theosophists, we would say there's archetypal mind within us. There are the truth, knowledge, we are knowledge. Knowledge is essentially what we are at the deep level. And rather than associate originality with the production of a form on the outside, we should think of originality as an act of the mind, as an inward act. When we read a great poet or a great essayist, and they take us to that place, in the middle of the night when we're reading and suddenly something has touched us so deeply, something has become luminous, that is true originality. It's a mental action. It's going back to the origin. It is finding the inspiration, as H.P. Blavatsky taught when we read, find the inspiration that allows us to know where that writer has come from. What made that writer say what he or she said? When we tap that in ourselves, we have retreated to that position. And that's really what deep reading is for. And it may express itself eventually in some kind of novel form, some kind of new thing that hasn't been said or done or acted. But that's not the criteria. That's only reading from the outside. And here's an example of imitation. And again, from Pico Iyer's essay on creativity, creativity in the deepest sense is not the construction of that from which we are detached, but rather that which affirms its intrinsic connection to the unity of being. And finally, the fourth point is that true inspiration begins to blur one's sense of agency. And by this I mean one's ego sense of agency. In Chinese philosophy, they speak of wu wei, of effortless action. As my friend Jim Tepfer recently said, this has to do with the release of the will. In the West, we have this notion of egotistic energy and a forceful exertion that requires us to release the will, and it really I love reading Chinese philosophy because it turns that whole idea on its head. And in Chinese philosophy, in becoming part of the Tao, you realize, as Mr. Judge teaches us, that will energy is universally distributed. And we can enter into will energy as our ideas, as we create harmony within our inner vestures, we become more available to become an instrument of harmony in the world. And then we often have experiences of true creativity that are self-transcendent, that the ego sense of agency is transcended and something more is working through us. Rachel, I was going to put this here as originality, but let me go to Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson has a lovely statement when she was reflecting on her writing of Silent Spring. She speaks about the writing. She says, the heart of it is something very complex and has to do with the ideas of destiny and with an almost inexpressible feeling that I am merely an instrument through which something has happened, that I've had little to do with it myself. So in true creativity, we have tuned ourselves, we've attuned ourselves, I think, in the very precise way that Eva spoke about it. And we make ourselves available to become agents of harmony in this deepest sense. And finally, that's all I really have to say. But we could also say about creativity that it involves love, and it involves what Maria Popova said, the unrelenting idealism, that it, in the end, is the mightiest of realisms. And we through loving ideals of excellence, something in us is built. There's always an act of self-forgetfulness. As this young visitor at the museum looking at Michelle Obama's portrait, I think it speaks beautifully for itself. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to pick up and talk about the idea of creativity in regards to human potential. And I have Ann Kelly here to help me explore this. Ann has been involved with broadcasting and been in the arts all of her life. And that's why I thought you were the perfect person to talk about this, because I think almost by nature, you've spent a whole lifetime trying to be as creative as you can, which I think is really, which is really cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you know, I think in this topic of human potential, I really felt that this was one of the key ideas we wanted to explore a little bit. Because you think about all the wonderful things in the arts, you know, you think about all the great paintings and music and cinema and not to speak of, you know, just things in ordinary life too. You know, we're just, I know mothers who are super clever in creating games for their children to play, and you know, and school teachers, you know, figuring out really creative ways to get their points across. So, you know, it's such a central part of being human that we wanted to explore it. In the case of the lecture series, we are looking at it in regards to a theosophical perspective. And I just wanted, Ann, to get some thoughts from you in general, because I know how strongly you feel about the idea of, you know, applying the ideas and trying to live by the ideas. If you were in like an elevator and had just a few minutes to talk to somebody, or maybe on a plane crossing the country or something, and you were raised, you had this question raised that was, what does creativity have to do with living a spiritual life? How would you respond to that? What sort of things come to mind?
Well, what does creativity have to do with a spiritual life? Everything is created. Everything. We're a creator. We've been created by the creator, our absolute. So in this physical world, everything is created. Everything we're looking at, this, we call it Maya in Theosophy, this illusion, the world of the physical. So there really isn't anything that isn't part of this. And I wanted to mention, there was a quote from Einstein where he talks about imagination. Imagination is more powerful than intellect. I don't know if I have the exact quote. Well, yeah, it's more, it's not, it was knowledge, actually. Imagination, this creative force, is more important than knowledge. Because with imagination comes everything. Everything is, I mean, this computer that I'm talking to you on right now, that was somebody's imagination. The audio waves that are going and feeding into your camera in California from the UK, somebody thought of that. It is imperative how we pay attention to this and our role in this. So how would we connect with the spirit that is within all of us, within everything? They're almost, they cannot be divided. As far as creativity, I can't say they could be separate. They're just not. And I think that's a lot of my answers would be, we are not separate from it. It is not separate from us. We are not separate from one another.
Yeah. Well, you think about, when we talk about the idea of a spiritual path, it is a path, which means that there are choices to be made. There's lots of turns left and right you can go. So in a way, don't we have to be kind of creating the path that we're that we're taking. We're having to figure things out, and that requires some degree of creativity, perhaps.
That's true. Like looking within, and I remember being told long ago that they said the path appears as you begin to walk it. You cannot see it before you. It is, you are the path. It is you. It's not a place. It's not a state. It's you. And you become that path as you head towards what you believe is where you need to be headed on this spiritual quest that we're all on, trying to find out who we are, where we are, why we are, where we're going after this. That we become that. And yeah, the choices that we make, you know, that all the decisions we have to make to create this path, to be able to see it more clearly. All of that comes into factor in as far as we create the path. In my understanding, we are the path. And we can make really terrible choices on that path, and we can make some good ones too. It's not an easy path. I mean, it's simple, but it's not so easy to stay on it all the time.
That raises a really important question here that I'm really glad that you made that point. In the Voice of the Silence, it makes that proclamation that the student needs to become the path.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That's always kind of, I found rather paradoxical and a little bit bedeviling. What does it mean to become the path?
I remember that, and I remember thinking, what? And all of these things, as I revisit these texts, I still to this day will open them up and something completely different comes out of them. Something completely different that I never saw before, I never understood. I think as we evolve, these teachings reveal even more. They're almost like little magical boxes. But I remember reading that. I remember thinking, we are the path. I am the path. A little help here, please. I need to know which way to go, how to do this. Once we become these teachings, which is what I do say and what I have said in a talk I've done with you before, which is nothing is more imperative than taking these ancient teachings, this ancient philosophy, these truths, these timeless truths, these universal principles, and applying them in everyday life. You and I, before we began this talk, talked about how imperative that is in everyday life. Like if you're in traffic, like say you're in traffic, or you have get a speeding ticket, you are diagnosed with cancer, somebody that you know is in the throes of death, and it's time to let them go. All of these teachings become instruction manuals. They're instruction manuals for humanity. Mm-hmm. So the question that you said about the path, I've kind of understood that wherever you're at, that's the most sacred place in the world. That's wherever you're at, is you're a part of that. So it's not a place that we're going to go. I think we still think that it's going to be a location or possibly someone else, like a supernatural superhero is going to come, a magical, mystical being is going to come and sprinkle some fairy dust and we're all magically, I don't know, enlightened. To me, it doesn't work like that. It is a difficult, sometimes pleasant, a lot of times it's work, overcoming our lower selves, which is the greed and fear and ignorance and pride and all of that. We need to overcome that with our higher self, which you can unconditional love and empathy and compassion. In every day, there is nothing but opportunities to put that in place. And in my understanding, that becomes the path. The next indicated step will be revealed, but I kind of understand it a little bit better. Can't say I know it. I just say that I understand it just a little bit better than I did. Maybe, but tomorrow I might look at it differently, but I just know that I want to try to walk the path the best I can.
You know, that made me think of listening to you is that, like you said, each student, each pilgrim soul is at a particular point in their journey. Mm-hmm. And if they're trying to grow in their depth of compassion, their depth of empathy, their depth of insight, et cetera, all of the qualities of unfoldment that we're trying to foster. There's steps along the way, right? I mean, you don't learn to be a concert pianist in one session. You learn it over lifetimes, probably. Mm-hmm. So there's steps that need to be taken. Each one of us is at a step. We're trying to take a step. Mm-hmm. So maybe to the extent that we're kind of knowledgeable about that part of the path that we're on. just that little portion. And maybe what we can do is we can, from that point, we can say, I just finished walking down that stretch and it leads that way.
Yeah.
Now, you're not claiming to know what the end is going to be like, but
Right.
you do know you've fallen down and skinned your knees or whatever, and you've got a little bit of insight from maybe just that stretch of the road that you've been on. And to the degree that you're willing to share that with other people and kind of point the way just in that stretch, maybe that's you're like a road sign yourself, you know,
I
just
think
for that stretch that you've been on. How about that?
I absolutely think that's a great analogy. That is a great way of looking at it. Everything in life is a test. Everything that we have, all these opportunities, that's what we're there to learn at that moment. I think a lot of us think we need to have, if we have a mission to accomplish here, we need to be big, you know, like Oprah Winfrey's or something, or I don't know. But I think if we take a look at our immediate family, our immediate circumstances, whether we're walking the dog along the beach or we're serving at a soup kitchen, whatever it is, that particular moment, a bill that is here that you don't know how to pay, that is when you get a chance to reflect in yourself to see how you're going to navigate the physical world. And so, yes, everything is a test, and pain is the usher of wisdom. And that is what shapes us. We're here to learn. Earth is a school, from what we understand, from what I understand, and we're here to learn. And this is an opportunity of a lifetime, being in the physical body, to be able to remember or learn or even head in that direction. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of people here, and I was one for many, many years. I still don't know anything. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what I know. I don't know if I know anything. I have an idea of something, but that's always evolving as different things come into my life. But yeah, we're here to, a lot of people are just in the I, me, my, and they don't have that deep empathy or that deep crushing compassion or this call to serve. They're just existing, and that's exactly where they need to be. But if you do feel this call, if you do feel this, I don't know, I call it a call to compassion is what it feels like a little knocking, let's get to work, to help to ease the unnecessary suffering, as it says in our teachings, to help ease the unnecessary suffering of all beings on our planet. If you feel that empathy, some empaths come in and they go, I need to save the world. But you got to, Gandhi, we talked about Gandhi before we started. He's always saying, be the change that you wish to see. It's basically what we're talking about. You become that change in every possible way that you can. Just be better than you were yesterday and do the very best that you can. Because when you do that, because we're all one thing, we affect everybody when we overcome our lower selves. So we're all on the path together, each one at our own evolution. But when we overcome ourselves and we have a little victory over a broken heart or a cataclysm or whatever, that lifts everything. It helps the whole. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of the way I look at it. So I have a feeling of responsibility, and I wish I could say I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm not. I just know that these teachings feel absolutely so true, and I wish to apply them to the best of my ability.
What do you think are some of the attitude? You've mentioned a couple just now, but if you were to spell out some of the attitudes that you would want to adopt to become a more creative person in this endeavor, what are some of the attitudes of mind that you might think of to enrich being more creative in this creative process of walking the path?
I would have to say, and I've learned, and I'm learning this, I'd have to say the hard way, because I thought I knew so much when I was younger, and this is the way I wanted to do it. Even yesterday, I'd have to say, I thought I knew so much. When we are quiet, the quiet mind, and it doesn't have to be where you're meditating forever underneath the Bodhi tree, just you quiet the mind of the lower self, the voice of the earthly self, of the constant chatter. That's why in my understanding, that's why we meditate, to quiet that mind. And then pure potential. You're able to tap into pure potential when you're quiet enough to hear beyond the words of your personality, your earthly personality. And so I didn't understand that for many years, and I still don't, because I have a lot of times I'll have an earpiece in, I'm listening to a book or I'm listening to a video. I'm thinking, I'm not really being that quiet. Even though I'm in a quiet space, I still have some information going in. But if we can have a calm mind, you're never going to have a situation here on earth where everything is calm. You have to be calm in spite of uncalmness and all that. If we can find a little port in that storm and quiet, we do have the ability to tap into pure potential. And that is something that I mentioned in the talk that I gave with you last time, which is a lot of times people think, oh, that's channeled. And in my understanding, and I'm only speaking from my understanding, and it's only to the level that I'm at today. So from what I understand, if the universal consciousness created all of us, this mind, we are part of that mind. So we're all channeling it, and what we're bringing in to us is not separate from us. And so some of us can use discernment and our judgment and use it wisely. Some of us will use it for selfish gain. And that is just the human nature, I think.
So solitude is important for creativity.
Solitude, I think, the quiet mind, whatever gets you there. To me, mine is being out in nature. When I'm in nature, absolutely, without doubt, it is church. Something happens out there. When I'm out along the sea, I do live by the ocean. I'm really lucky to be able to be that close. It doesn't have to be the ocean, but somewhere that isn't man-made. I think is it Voltaire, his quote where he talks about man destroys nature to build these churches, to worship the God that he's destroyed to build the churches. And again, I butchered that quote. I don't have that, but that's true. When we are out there in nature, when you can be out there, even if you're walking, you don't have to sit. You don't have to sit to meditate. You're just going to quiet the mind a little bit and just be in this beautiful space, wherever. It could be a park. It could be a parking lot where there's a little patch of grass. It doesn't matter. You don't have, there's no perfect way to do it. There's no perfect mantra. You don't have to pay any money to have somebody teach you this. You know this stuff already. You know it. And if you're able to be willing to be open for it to present itself, it will. So solitude, yes, the quieter the mind, I think the more absolute, like I said, potential or possibilities, they're limitless. If we would just realize that we're connected to something much greater than our physical selves. I really wish we would start acting like that. We say it, but we don't act it.
So maybe that's another attitude to kind of pull out of what you're saying there, is that when you realized that you're not isolated at all, that you're connected to this immense network of thought and creativity, and if that is at your disposal in some respect. So that raises a whole new question. If that's true, and I think you and I do think it's true, then what is it that gets in the way? What is it that's interfering with our contact with this creative potential? There must be, I mean, human beings struggle with this, right? It doesn't come easily to people. Most people complain about the fact that their lives are routine and their minds run in a squirrel cage, and they're repeating themselves over and over again and that sort of thing. So what are some of the things that are blocking the creative mind, do you think?
These are brilliant questions, by the way, and this is a fantastic series. I wanted to take this moment to thank everybody at Universal Theosophy for all that you do. I really want to say thank you for that. It is the world of the five senses that we are absolutely fascinated with, and many people believe that is all that there is. You have sight, sound, taste, touch, hearing, and what am I missing? Taste, no, smell. Anyway, we can't see past that. We honestly cannot see past that. And if we would just clear our channel, a clear channel, for some reason, even when we do access what we call the astral or the psychic, the spiritual, we always say anything outside of the physical is obviously, spiritual. Not always. If you take a look at our books and our studies, it talks about the astral realm, which wraps around this physical world, which is one of billions upon billions, countless, the ever-expanding universe. If we could just look outside of ourselves just for a little bit, just for a second, to realize we're not the only game in town. There's so much more to us. So if we clear our channel, and I'd have to say that I, again, didn't understand this. It kind of came as a realization of, oh my God, I get it now. The alcohol, I don't drink anymore. I certainly drank some of your share too. I've been sober for 20 years, 20 years now. And veganism came in as well. And an understanding that I was like, oh, I wish I'd be quiet. They just on and on and on. And then I understood. I simply understood that I could not build my body with the suffering of other beings. I just couldn't do it. It wasn't a matter of a diet or anything like that, but I understood. It's just an understanding one day. And I thought, I can do this. So by clearing that channel, by my body now, I've been vegan since May of 2018. The health benefits off the charts. I was not expecting compassion to give anything back. I was not expecting anything back. I just didn't want to build myself with unnecessary suffering. It was completely incongruent with what my heart felt. So you clear the channel. You know, the alcohol, it's kind of like being on a computer that's logged off the internet. You can't understand why it's not connecting. You're severing that tie. If you know, not everybody drinks to oblivion, but I do find that that is a tie severer. A compassion in what you build your body. Veganism, I have to say, that is a huge thing that really does help to elevate, but I can't say I'm elevated at all. Somebody asked me the other day, they said, would you say, I was at a healing group and they said, would you say that you're enlightened, you know, woke? I said, absolutely not. I have no idea. And even if I was, I would never even say that. I don't know what that means. All I know is I want to be better than I was before, a better version of myself, because I'd like to help to ease the unnecessary suffering of all beings on our planet. Mm-hmm. So those are two ways that I have. Some people would say, oh, that's no fun. Well, that's fine. You're wherever you're at. This is what I've done. And the quiet solitude is not where you're locked away 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night. Some people do that. You can go on a quiet walk, just quiet your mind and realize that those thoughts aren't everything. You can rise above them. You can get right back to them after you're done, but try to find that time in between the thoughts, because that's where the voice of the silence is.
You brought up something that I thought might be a nice concluding question to ask you, because I know that you've spoken to me about this before, and how you've responded to it might help all of us. I think when a person tries to be creative, they're trying to they have to experiment. They have to try things, right? And sometimes that meets with resistance. You know, our friends and family, you know, you change your diet, which you were mentioning. Maybe you established a practice for yourself, like pausing before you speak. So it might be a little awkward to hear you talking differently because you're spending a little bit more time thinking before you're speaking. I mean, when we're trying to be creative in these ways, there's pushback from other people. There's always a certain amount of negativity, perhaps, that people run into. So in the process of trying to become more creative, how does a person deal with this negativity? What's the best way to address it?
You mean the negativity from others or from within yourself, or both?
Others, mainly,
from others. Okay, totally. Now, remember being on radio for so many years, I have a little thick skin to not worry so much about what other people say. At the beginning, I was absolutely, and I still, you know, in a way, we all still are. We must remember, even in the deathbed regrets, when they go, I really wish I would have done something differently. A majority of them say, I wish I would have lived free from trying to do things to get the approval of other people. And that's the thing. Don't be afraid. My first job was singing telegrams. I'm certainly not shy. I have made a fool of myself so many times, but it doesn't matter. People aren't thinking about you as much as you think they're thinking about you. If you feel, you know, to put that we call it paintbrush on the canvas and start somewhere, you have to start and do it. Don't worry about that. If you're not hurting anybody else and you're coming from a place of your own truth, and as long as it's kind and it's not hurting anyone, then have at it. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks. And the laws that we seem to have, these things that we say, well, it's not socially acceptable. We're always in flux. We're always changing. And as long as we're respectful follow that vibe through, but please, please, please know that other people, they have no control over your value. So if they don't see what you see in it, but you see something in it and it feels right to you, then do it. Do it. And if you can share who you are in ways, whether it can be song, it can be acting, it can be whatever. It doesn't even, those are just the arts. Anything else. Some people do poetry. Some people just walk with other people and they talk and they listen. You can heal and love and listen and just be of service that way. And in a way, the creativeness there is learning how to actually have a conversation where you're not having to talk over each other all the time. You're actually being creative in your way of loving. There's so many things. And in my thing is I do TikToks and things like that. I try to share a few of these ideas in creative ways, or videos, or recordings and stuff. It doesn't have to be the arts, but please, 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 if you take nothing from this, other people have absolutely no way to define you. And there's no way you could ever get in their minds to do so. And once they do think about you, they're 5 seconds later, they're all thinking about something else. But we all live in that prison for many, many years. Some people do it to the very day they die. So hopefully you can save some time and realize that the negativity only comes from judgment, and their judgment does not define you. It defines where they're at the moment. It doesn't define you.
Yeah, I remember reading from Emerson.
Mhm.
He said, for truth to be truth, there must be some edge to it.
Yeah.
He says, I know I'm moving in the right path when I'm getting some resistance. Because there is this idea that society kind of wants you to conform to it.
Yep.
And,
true.
you know, the independent creative spirit, which I think is necessary to engage in what, you know, you and I are calling walking a spiritual path, means charting your own course.
Yes.
Breaking out in a new direction.
Absolutely, because we are evolving. We are evolving. So you're understanding however you're going to be able to express yourself. And again, it doesn't have to just be the arts, but you express yourself. And we are, go back 10 years, go back 15 years, 50 years, 100 years. We are changing and evolving. And we must do so by honoring our truth through whatever it is that we can. And whatever skills, each one of us is essential. There isn't anybody here who's expendable, not even the darkest of the dark. They're all part of our story too. We are it is us. So we just need to suit up and show up the best that we can. It is an opportunity, like I said, that is beyond even our comprehension to be here in the physical body on earth. It is also one of the places of greatest suffering. There's a lot of suffering here. And it's not easy. And some people you can't check out. It's school. You can't leave early. These lessons will come, and they're happening right now in our days. No matter what it is you're going through that day, that's what you're supposed to learn. It isn't going to be some moment and then this big rock is revealed and it's carved what you're going to be doing every day in every way. You are walking this path, and the people around you, they are your greatest teachers. The ones who cause you the most suffering, they are your greatest teachers. It's true.
That's a good note to end on, and I really appreciate your sharing your thoughts, and I think that we can all take a lot of benefit out of it, and I'm grateful. Let's open it up to everybody else. Any questions or comments? So I'll start with one myself. And I'd like to ask this of all three speakers. If you were to try to point to the one thing that gets in the way the most because I think all three speakers did a really good job of explaining the fact that creativity lies at the center of the spiritual life. That's a common, I picked up as a common theme in all three lectures. Creativity is an essential component to living a spiritual life. What is it that blocks that? What is it? What's one of the central things that gets in the way of of creativity. And Ava, let me start with you, and then I'll turn to Joe, and then Anne. Each one of you could just give a brief comment about that question. I'd appreciate that. So Ava, starting with you, what is one of the main things that blocks creativity?
Well, I think that Anne expressed it beautifully, that what stands in the way is the small ego, the conditioned mind that is set in a certain form that has crystallized into my view, in contradistinction to other people's views, in my view being the right, and other people's view being wrong. So I think that when we move away from the idea of separateness, and as Anne pointed out, start to live the teaching, well, then the creativity starts to flow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Joe?
I'm tying in with what Ava just said. I think the emotion of fear ends up being an obstacle too, because in that sense of separation, we erect all kinds of defenses by which to project all the things we're familiar with and block out everything that's not familiar. And from fear, of course, comes the other afflictive emotions of aggression and judgment and condemnation and all those kinds of practices. So I think coming to grips with fear is very important.
Thank you, Joe. Anne?
I'd say anything that keeps us separate from it, it's definitely our ego, our sense of separation. Yeah, we always worry about what other people are going to think. And on the deathbeds of so many, they say, I wish I didn't care about that. That has been so limiting. We need not to worry about what other people think. Be your beautiful self. You're here to live. You're here to shine. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Elaine, you had a question you wanted to raise? Make sure you unmute.
Yeah. Is it possible to consider that creativity is in a certain way collective work? For instance, when I say I am, the I is collective, truly, no? So that question about the question is about the collective aspect.
Yes, what a great question. Yeah, because boy, in the course of all three lectures, I kept thinking about myself the whole way through, like how does an individual become more creative? But you're quite right that the creative process, as evidence for what we've done here today, is a collaborative thing in so many ways. So what's the relationship between the individual and the collective in regards to creativity? Ava, would you care to respond to that?
Yeah, I think you cannot really have true creativity without having that collaboration, because that collaboration is what counteracts the idea of separateness. So I think that, we are so interconnected and we learn from each other the whole time. We have different perspective on the diamond. And if we get together and share our perspectives on it, then we'll all get a fuller view.
Joe?
I think that one of the distinctive things that Theosophy has taught me is that the more that we feel a sense of purpose that's shared with others, and the more we experience moments where we lose ourselves in the greater human endeavor, that we have more in common with other people, the more that sense of self dissolves, the more creative we become. So creativity is not, some kind of sense of isolated agency and coming up with something new or weird, but it seems to flow naturally from us the more we're self-forgetful in the best sense.
Yeah.
Talking about the fear again and the separate, we're like a tapestry. We are one another. That's what our teachings tell us. If we start to understand, we're not separate. And that isn't just some airy-fairy thing. We truly are not separate from one another. And if we start acting that way, absolutely, we need to collaborate and work together as a unit. That's what we are. I don't know why we can't see that yet. Do we not see each other in the faces of this war that's raging? How is it they don't see their children's faces in the other people? How do you not see it? once we understand we truly are one another, maybe we'll be able to work together a little bit better.
Mhm, mhm. Any other questions from the group or comments on this topic by others in attendance? Go ahead and just speak up because I'm not sure I can see all of you. There we go. That might help a little bit. Any other comments on collaboration and creativity?
I just had one question that came up when the discussion went from creativity into the moral states or laws or action. And between those, connecting those two, it was mentioned how both the will comes in to be exercised and rational processes. And yet that connection between creativity and the moral states breaks down so often that, of course, the comments that have just been made now relate to how that happens, but it wasn't specifically identified as relating to how we make our judgments, and the paradoxical, or at least opposite views of occur in terms of action in the world. Everyone wants to think they're being creative, and everyone would, in a sense, say that they're making moral judgments, which is for the good, but it often doesn't turn out that way.
Mm-hmm.
You speak on what that paradox might be founded on, except ignorance, of course.
Anyone who would like to respond to Ray's question and comments?
I have a feeling that it was probably my comments that Ray's referring to. Ray's the paradox is that that the will that we can think we're willing the good and we're not, or that I don't know. Could you concisely state what the paradox is?
Yes, we want to be creative, and we all move into moral states, but those moral states can be either beneficial or quite harmful. And that creates a kind of paradox, because I mean, paradoxes are simply something we don't understand, but and we're all using an exercise of the will and what we think are rational processes, but that's not, it seems to me, quite true. And how we can understand that better seems like a good place to work with, which of course we have in our different ways during these three talks.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I was thinking about something Anne said. She began by saying that, well, aren't we all channels? You know, and I'm thinking about the Gita telling us that the person of discrimination, the person of discernment, recognizes I'm not the doer, and recognizes that the qualities act in the qualities. So the more self-knowledge we have, the more we begin to see what is acting through us, what are we putting into action, and we recognize more refined states of being, more refined states of feeling and intellection, and then coarser states of us. And we give both of those action and expression, and when we do, we reinforce those within us. So it really is a matter of discernment, you know, to see. I mean, the will is impartial. It's as said, a colorless fluid, and it will act on whatever we want it to act on. So it's really up to us to have the kind of discernment where we begin to see these levels within ourselves and learn to give articulation, in the sense Anne was talking about, the articulation of our whole being to the finer qualities that we continually discern.
Maybe we might end on one last question. There's a very successful songwriter, her name is Diane Warren, who is famous for her practice of songwriting, the way she goes about it. Most people in the musical songwriting world will tell you that a song begins with an inspiration. And from that inspiration, some melody line, some lyric phrase is like a seed, and from that it kind of grows out and kind of unfolds itself. And it's, we human beings long for that magical experience of bringing birth to an inspiration, to expressing it in some way, whether it be in music or any other sphere. But the thing about Diane Warren that's interesting is that she goes to work every single day and sits down at her piano and works on writing music, even if she's not inspired, even if she's got no momentum going for a new song. She's made it a practice to every day from certain hours to sit down and work on writing music. So my question is, in regards to creativity, what is the role of discipline in becoming a more creative person? Ava, let's go through our three speakers and then we'll call it an evening. Ava, we'll start with you. What's the role of discipline in creativity?
I think that discipline is absolutely necessary, because if we think about true creativity coming through when the lower mind is still and when we have transcended our likes and dislikes, that takes a lot of discipline. So it's like dusting the mirror every moment. And that takes discipline, and it takes the capacity to maintain one's motivation, not only from day to day, but from life to life, or wanting to be of service. And for that, you need discipline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Ava. Joe?
I'd like to let Anne speak since I answered the last question.
Well, I'm going to give all three of you a chance. Go ahead, Joe. You go first, and then Anne, we're going to end with you.
Well, I kind of addressed it, maybe fumbling in my talk, really, that it's this incubation period before we have something to express. There has to be this long incubation period, the solvent of self, that churning and thinking and all of that often gets expressed in, whether you're looking in, especially you see it in the performing arts and dance and music, by a lot of woodshedding, by a lot of time working on scales, working on arpeggios, studying the music of other people, developing these reflexes, which then, once the body is built of these, then they connect. There's a quick anecdote. We all know the artwork of M.C. Escher, the Dutch illustrator. When he in a biographical note, he says he was seized as a young man by the desire to perfect his art, and he thought there was nothing else. He was always the top of his class. He was imitating the masters. He was mastering the techniques, and it consumed him entirely. And he said, "This is great." And then suddenly that desire died, and he was in a void. And he was like, "What was this all for?" And then a deeper desire began to arise in him, which was the desire to communicate abstract ideas to people. And he suddenly realized that everything he had made could be at the service of this. And then that's what he did.
Thank you, Joe. Anne, I'm going to give you your last word.
Thank you so much. I was going to say, all of us have something to bring to the table. We're all this beautiful tapestry. It doesn't have to be a poem, doesn't have to be a song, doesn't have to be a video. Every one of us has something to share. Each and every one of us is unique, but all part of the same thing. And we got to make sure that our discernment doesn't become egotistical judgment. Just a discernment is different than judgment. We got to get over our judgment and thinking that we can't or they can't or any of that. Just beingness, and share what it is that you are. Become it and live it. Thank you.
Yeah. Ava, you wanted to say one last thing. Go ahead.
Just last thing, I'm thinking of Michelangelo when he was sculpturing the statue of David. And they asked him, how do you go about to do it? And he said, well, I only chisel away that which is not supposed to be there.
That's a great thought to end our meeting. Okay, well, thank you very much to our three speakers. Very much appreciate all the effort, energy, and enthusiasm you brought to today, and to everyone who participated by listening and thinking about what we're talking about. Our gratitude, and we'll see you in a week, and we'll take up the topic of kindness. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jerry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
presenters.
Bye-bye.
Good job.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Rick. All the best.
Thanks. It's the same to you.